Well, welcome back and thank you so much for joining me. I cannot believe it's been such a long time since I've done a book review. Over a year has passed and I've not done a book review. And it's even more dramatic because I realized that I have not reviewed this book that I'm holding up in front of you, which is one of my most favorite books, certainly up there in my top 10, and simply entitled Akiva, although the subtitle is The Story of Rabbi Akiva and His Times, written by Meir Lehman, Rabbi Meir Lehman. His Gentile name is Marcus, a German rabbi that was born in the 1890s and was very dedicated to fighting assimilation, but in his time wrote some very, very influential books, one of them being an account of Rabbi Akiva's life story, which has been translated here into English by Pearlie Zucker. And this is a Feldhelm publication, which is one of the more reliable publications, Orthodox Jewish publications that are floating around that with Art Scroll. And I just couldn't put this book down when I first purchased it. And this is going back a few years now, probably early 2000s, and I just powered through it and I was finished it in no time. And it was such an inspiring book to read. All the things that happened to Rabbi Akiva, I knew some of them already, but it's not until you read a sort of a story narrative that you realize how bizarre and how extraordinary this man's life was. And I mean, the first couple of chapters are really kind of a love story between Raquel, which is the very young Jewish daughter of his master, who he's working for as a shepherd. His master being obviously a Jewish man, Rabbi Ben Kalba Savua, and Akiva is the son of a family of converts, and so technically he's Jewish by conversion, and he's looked upon as being probably not of being good stock from the perspective of quite a lot of Jews at that time. And he had no assets. His parents were all killed during the Roman revolt. And so he had to work, yet he was a kind of like a really sort of switched on guy in terms of his work ethic. And almost straight away when he took over the duties of his master, his like Jacob, it was almost like he everything he touched turned to gold. It was a blessing, followed him almost whatever he got involved with in terms of his master's affairs. And his master, Rabbi Ben Kalba Savua, his daughter, she was very beautiful, and she was going to marry a Roman nobleman. Took interest in her, and she wasn't having it. She was somebody who was very focused on Israel and the Torah, and it was a very dark time. It was a very dark time for being a Jew in that time in history, around 50 AD. And the Romans were sort of really knocking the snot out of the Jews, and it was touch and go. It was almost like the nation of Israel predominantly being presided over by the Jews and the Benjamites and some of the house of Levi, were really had a real sense that they could be snuffed out of existence because of the harsh and cruel laws that were being implemented and all the things that were happening during the revolt. And this sort of sets the backdrop of the story. And then as the story progresses, Akiva becomes more involved until sort of towards the sort of definitely at the last sort of act, he's involved in endorsing what is believed at that time to be a Mashiach. And, you know, that kind of all sort of goes south. It all kind of unravels. And then ultimately Akiva is captured by the Romans because there was a decree that anybody found teaching Torah was to be not only executed, but to be tortured and killed, tortured and executed. And so the first couple of chapters, we have this intense exchanges between Raquel ben Kalba Savua's daughter and Akiva about the nation of Israel, or the Jews. Let's just call them the Jews because the majority of they were the Jews. You know, the other 10 tribes had gone, right? And so she would debate with him about the importance of the rabbis, the sages, because at the time Akiva hated the Jewish sages. He thought that their learning was pointless and they should be engaged in practical activities and not just all spend their whole time learning. And Raquel disagreed with this, and she said they're the key to Israel's survival. And there's a beautiful scene where they're sitting near a stream, and Akiva, his argument against Raquel's argument is that the Jewish nation continues to get absolutely belted every, couple of sort of 100 years, and they almost get wiped out. And if the sages were kind of all good, why can't they avert, these disasters that seem to continue to plague the nation throughout its life? And she looks at the stream and she says to Akiva, and this is in the novel, obviously based on historical events. She says, see how there's rocks in the stream and they're obstructing the water, because the stream was a fast-flowing stream of water, and the rocks obstruct the water, but the water parts around the rocks and rushes past and continues on. And she says the nation of Israel is very much like that though the nations become obstacles for us and cause us to have to divert from going where we want to go, we eventually achieve our objective. And there's the famous story where Rabbi Akiva saw the water dripping on the stone, causing the stone to develop a hole going right through the stone, simply brought on by the repetitious dripping of water on rock. And so he comes to the conclusion that if this rock can be penetrated by a mere drop of water, which just takes continuous repetition over a long period of time, then the Torah may be able to penetrate his heart, though it was hard for the most part, at least towards the rabbinical establishment. And so he approaches Ben Kalba Savua for his daughter's hand in marriage, and that wasn't well received. And his father said that if he was to do this, he was no longer going to be employed by him, and he would not give his daughter any of his inheritance because he's quite a wealthy man. He was extremely wealthy landowner and farmer, and had thousands of sheep and lots of things. He's very wealthy. And so Akiva sort of went and consoled Raquel, and she was adamant that they would still be married. And she said, I don't care, I want to marry you as long as you promise to learn Torah and become a great scholar. And so they got married, and they lived in poverty, and their bed was made up of hay, and they barely had anything to scrape together, to the point where the legend was that Elijah the prophet actually came appearing as a beggar asking for hay. And that's something that they did have, which motivated Raquel to realize that she wasn't as bad off as she thought that they were. And that motivated her to finally encourage Akiva to go off to learn at a yeshiva, in which he learnt in his native town of Lod, where he studied and he became great. And he was away for 12 years. Then after the end of 12 years, he returned. And in that time, he had children with Raquel, with 12,000 students. And as he came to the door of his home, he could hear his wife talking to a neighbor who was not saying very nice things about Akiva, saying that what husband leaves their wife for 12 years, you should divorce him and be with somebody else, or tell him to not, to be at home more. And he heard his wife say that if she knew that he was going to become a great scholar, she would be okay if he'd actually go away for twice that length of time for another 12 years. And upon hearing that, his hand didn't touch the doorknob, and he turned around and walked away with his students, and he was gone for another 12 years. At the end of an additional 12 years, he returned again, and this time he returned with 24,000 students, some say 48,000 students, the figure varies, and knocked on the door, and his wife came out, and she saw all these thousands upon thousands of students, and she went to greet her husband, and the students stopped her. They said, "What's this woman? Who is this woman?" And he said, "All my Torah and all your Torah is in the merit of her. This lady is Raquel, my wife." And so it was a huge time for Raquel when she realized that her dream had come true, that she'd married somebody who had committed themselves so much to the study of Torah that she could tell from very early on, even before he went away to learn, that this man was going to have a huge positive impact on the nation of Israel, to the point where he is referred to as Rosh La HaKohamin, which means chief of the sages, according to the Tosafot, which is a very influential work in the Jewish world. He's a major contributor to the Mishnah and to Midrash Halakha, which is another work that's a big, it's a huge work in the Jewish world. And so he was so great that the other sages would refer to him as their chief. And when there was times of despair, he would not give in to despair and despondency and give in. He would always be optimistic. And this book really just goes through all his adventures. He gets shipwrecked. They go to take a chest of valuables to a Roman emperor. And on the way, they stay in an inn, and the chest is violated, and they put sand in the chest, but they're not aware that they've replaced all the gold and the jewelry with sand. And they open it in the presence of the emperor and his entourage, and he's insulted. And Akiva thinks very quickly and says that this is not just any earth. This is the earth from the burial places of Avraham Avinu, and it's blessed in the name of Avraham Avinu, or something like that. And if you take the earth and throw it at your enemies, you will always be victorious. And lo and behold, the emperor was later engaged in a battle. They brought out the chest. He gathered up some of the earth in the chest in his fist, and he threw the earth in the direction of his enemies, and they were victorious. And so there was a bit of quick thinking there by Rabbi Akiva. There's the famous story where he was going into a town and he was denied an opportunity to lodge there. So he and his student, who was his student, by the way, it's interesting how this book, sorry about that. It's interesting how this book talks about how he acquires his chief student, who was like the town sort of troublemaker. And he made this town troublemaker, his devoted student. And so him and his student were camping outside the town, and during the early hours of the morning, a Roman cohort or a garrison came through and they wiped out all the occupants of the town and razed it to the ground. And during the night, they had a chicken that was escaped, and the fire went out, and the donkey also escaped. And the student was like, oh, we're not having much luck here. This is before they found out that the town was about to be attacked by the Romans. But if the fire had remained burning, the Romans garrison would have seen the fire and come and got them and killed them. If the chicken had remained with them, it could have made noises and given them away, and the same with the donkey. So Rabbi Akiva sort of always taught that anything that ever happens to us is for the good. And so he sort of had that outlook. And then we lead up to the time where the Jews are winning some battles against the Romans, and they actually retake Jerusalem, and they even start foundations of rebuilding another Beit HaMikdash, a holy temple. And they even coin their own currency, so things look like they're on the up and up for the Jews. And they put their allegiance behind a leader, Bar Kokhba, who they believe could be the Mashiach. Or a lot of them do believe he's the Mashiach, and indeed Rabbi Akiva endorses him as such. Not long into the actual period, Akiva realizes that Bar Kokhba is not the Mashiach because of his desire to want to join forces with the Samaritans, who are a foreign nation. And this is an alarm bell. This raises a red flag with Rabbi Akiva. And at that point, he withdraws his support, but it's too late. Too much momentum had picked up. And during the course of the events, the Samaritans found a tunnel in Jerusalem, and they actually let the Romans come through that tunnel and attack the Jews from within. And so the Samaritans ended up becoming their undoing, and there was a brutal slaughter. And then Rabbi Akiva continued to teach, sort of moving towards the south area of Jerusalem, until he was finally apprehended, believe it or not, by the actual ex-husband of his second wife, because his wife Raquel ends up passing away at some point, and he marries a convert who was a Roman noblewoman married to a Roman officer. And that Roman officer was very angry that his wife divorced him and she'd converted to Judaism. She was a Roman, very beautiful Roman woman who actually came to meet Rabbi Akiva and to actually insult him and really make him feel bad. But when she arrived to see him, he burst into tears, hysterical crying, and she hadn't said anything. She just merely, the door opened and he saw her, and he just started going into hysterics. And she kept asking him, "What's wrong? Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" And he said, "You're such a beautiful woman physically, yet you're on a path that's heading you toward destruction in Gehenna, and your great beauty, which will re-manifest in Gehenna, will be tortured beyond belief and torn into pieces over and over. And I can't stand what I'm seeing." And so this really frightened her, and it played on her mind, and she wanted to convert, and she was serious, and Rabbi Akiva could see how serious she was, and eventually he marries her. And at the time, Vespasian was at the very beginning of Rabbi Akiva's career. He was emperor of Rome. He passed away. Then Titus became emperor of Rome, and Titus's brother, Onkelos, I think it's Onkelos, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, he ends up becoming converts to Judaism, and ends up becoming a great Torah sage in his own right. And Titus sends Roman soldiers to go and get him and give him a stern talking to. And each time he sends a complement of Roman soldiers to get him, he talks to them about Torah concepts, and they end up all wanting to convert. And so I don't know if they end up giving up trying to get hold of him, or Titus actually gets him. But every time like they turn up to take him back to Titus, I think it's pronounced Titus, like that, he would start talking Torah matters to them, and they would be absolutely enthralled. One of the Roman soldiers that was trying to take him back to his brother saw the mezuzah on the doorpost, and he said, "What's that?" And he starts telling me all about the mezuzah. And so they stop and just start listening to him telling them these stories, and they want to convert by the end of it. So this Onkelos character must have been absolutely amazing. And it's interesting how converts, Akiva included, have such a potency. And this is why the Talmud says that a convert is a blight on the nation of Israel, because you think, well, hang on, isn't that a terrible thing that the Talmud says? Not at all, because if you read it in context, it's saying that a convert is a bad thing for the nation because it makes the native-born members of the nation of Israel, it can make them look bad because there's so much enthusiasm for a person who has joined themselves to the nation of Israel as a new convert. They have so much enthusiasm, all these things that a native-born Jew has been doing since birth. It's new to a mature person who's embraced Judaism and starting to observe it. And so, yeah, that's a very interesting concept. But I hardly recommend this book. I used to, I don't know, I was pondering whether I was going to mention this in the video, but for a while there when I was dating, I was trying to get the people that I was dating, if I was going out with a lady for a few weeks, maybe after a month or two, I would introduce this book to them. And if they didn't show an interest in this book, I'd kind of back out of the courting phase. And I was never successful, actually, to this very day. I've never really met anybody, who I was interested in, who showed an interest in wanting to read this book. And that's on me. That's down to me. That's not on anyone else. But that was what I was doing for a while. So I was saying, well, if I give this to somebody who I'm interested in to read it and they get it, then this is going to be the one. And eventually I just gave up doing that. But anyway, that's my review. I give this a review 1 out of 10. I don't give it 1 out of 10. Out of 10, I give it probably a 9. In terms of how it's going to make you feel after you've read it or while you're reading it, you are going to be brought back to life in terms of your enthusiasm for the Torah and for Judaism. And it's going to revive you if you're kind of feeling like you're waning a little bit. And if you're not, it's going to add fuel to the fire for you in terms of your enthusiasm. It just will. It's so beautifully translated and so easy to read. And every chapter is a page a page turner. Every chapter is more than one page. Anyway, you know what I mean. I'm usually quite slow at reading books, but I finished this one in record time very, very, very quickly. Anyway, that's it. Please, if you see this on a shelf at your local Judaica store or you see it online, I'll put a link in the description below so you can just click the link and go straight away and pick up a copy. Do so, you're doing yourself a favor. And please, I emphasize, it is a love story as well in terms of Raquel. Certainly the first 2 or 3 or 4 chapters, you really sort of feel, this intensity between them. And not only that, but Raquel's desire for Israel to be revived through Torah, returning to the Torah and returning to the Torah by the fuel and inspiration of the Chachamim, the wise ones of the nation, the Jewish sages. And it's really her fervency for the Torah that eclipses Akiva, at least initially, but she is sort of the fuel that powers Akiva on to the very end of his life. So it's very much about Raquel, his wife, and you realize how values have changed so much in this current day and age. Whereas, women want to find a man who's a good provider. This, she couldn't care less about the fact that he might have not have been able to provide it for them, she was just concerned with the fact that he was serious about learning Torah. And that was her concern. She didn't care if she lived in poverty. She was just like, okay, I want this guy to be a great scholar of Torah and be a positive influence in the nation. That's where she was holding, which I found was really interesting. Anyway, thank you for watching the video. And until next time, hopefully it won't be a year before I do another review. Bye for now.